So, what if the biggest battle you fight every single day isn't for your time or your money, but for your focus? Today, we're breaking down a really compelling piece that offers a biblical lens on how to win that exact battle. It really lays out a path from the constant noise of distraction to a place of genuine peace. Let's dive right in. The author kicks things off with this one super powerful question. And it's not just about what we happen to look at during the day. It's about what our eyes are truly fixed on. What's capturing our mental and our spiritual energy from one moment to the next? And this is where the author frames it as a literal battlefield. But the prize isn't land or resources, it's our attention. Every single day, we are right in the middle of this relentless competition for what gets to occupy our minds. And look, these are the forces on that battlefield. We all know them, right? The buzzing phone, the 24/7 news cycle, the political drama. And that's before we even get to the internal stuff, like our own personal fears and struggles. The author's point is that all of these are vying for the director's chair of our mind. This right here, this is the core idea of the entire piece. The author argues that distraction isn't just some modern annoyance, it's a spiritual strategy. See, the goal isn't always to destroy a person, but simply to pull their focus away from what truly matters. Because when that happens, peace and joy, they're usually the first casualties. Okay, so if the problem is a relentless barrage of noise, what's the first step to fighting back? Well, the author proposes something that sounds almost radical in our culture. It's not more action, but stillness. And this verse is presented as the foundational command. Before we rush to react, before we try to solve everything on our own, the very first step is to intentionally just stop, to be still, and to actively remember who is ultimately in control of the whole situation. This really captures the choice we have in any chaotic moment. Our default setting, over on the right, is usually to get swept up in the storm, to panic, to react. But the author argues the real path to strength is on the left, a conscious choice to find a place of stillness, to pause, and to regain some much-needed perspective. And here's a key insight. Stillness isn't passive. Not at all. It's an active realignment. It's about intentionally creating the mental space to remind ourselves that even when life feels completely out of control, our circumstances do not have the final say. So once we found that stillness, the author says the next step is to actively train our minds. It's not enough to just block out the noise. We have to intentionally choose what we're going to focus on instead. The guiding principle for this training is to aim our minds upward. Now, the source is clear. This isn't about ignoring our problems on Earth. It's about choosing to view those problems through a higher, heavenly perspective. And here's a really practical tool for that. The author calls it the 10,000-foot view. It's a mental exercise. Just step back from your problem for a second and ask, how would Christ see this? The idea is that from this higher vantage point, our problems don't just disappear, but they sure do shrink in comparison to the greatness of God. Next, the author points to this instruction, which directly confronts our tendency to worry. It's a pretty radical reordering of our priorities. Instead of focusing on our needs and then maybe turning to God, the instruction is to focus on His kingdom first, with the promise that our needs will be addressed as a result. The order is everything. And this is what that priority shift looks like in, say, the first 5 minutes of your day. Do you reach for the phone and immediately dive into the chaos of news and notifications? Or do you start with just a moment of stillness, prayer, or scripture? The author argues that this one choice can set the entire trajectory for your day. It all comes down to where you choose to aim your attention. The author's argument is that we often spend way too much energy analyzing the darkness, our problems, our fears. The instruction here is to stop staring at the darkness and instead turn and fix our eyes on the light, because light by its very nature pushes darkness away. Okay, so we've got the theory. Be still, then focus upward. But how does that actually work on a stressful Tuesday afternoon? Well, the author shares a really powerful story from his own life that shows it in action. He and his wife run a wedding business, but for them, it's not just a job. They see every single wedding as an opportunity to reflect God's love and to be a light for the couples and all the other vendors they work with. And here's where their focus paid off. They became friends with a DJ who had very, very different spiritual beliefs. But instead of arguing or debating, they simply focused on being a consistent source of light and friendship. And over time, without any pressure or force, that steady presence, it made a difference. Today, that friend is following Christ. So let's bring this all home. The core argument is that so much of the spiritual life really boils down to this. Where is your focus pointed? And it's not a one-time decision, but a choice we have to make, well, every single day. The source materials suggest that when challenges inevitably come up, our focus shouldn't just be on the problem itself, but on finding God within it. Trials get reframed as opportunities for refinement and for drawing closer to Him. And this might be the most important takeaway of all. This whole thing isn't about achieving a state of perfect, unbroken focus. It's about the gentle, repeated practice of refocusing. It's not about performance, it's about direction. And the outcome of that choice, it's laid out pretty clearly right here. Focusing on fear and problems, it just leads to anxiety and confusion. But focusing on Christ, according to the author, leads to peace and purpose. The contrast is stark, and the choice is always ours. And that brings us right back to the question that started it all. After breaking down this whole perspective on focus, the author leaves us with this one final thought. Forget about yesterday, forget about tomorrow. Where will your eyes rest today?